Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jordan Giesecke, and this is The Limiting Factor. This video will cover the Tesla Q4 2021 earnings call from a battery perspective. However, I will branch out a little bit more than usual because there was a lot of products discussed at this earnings call that I'm personally passionate about. From my perspective, this was the most important earnings call I've ever listened to from Tesla, and I've been listening to every one of them since around 2016. Now, you will notice that I have a new background. Thanks to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members, I'm now full-time and I'm living back in the US. And as soon as I can, I'll make a video to discuss that. With that out of the way, let's get into the Q4 2021 earnings call, starting with the investor slide deck. When I started flipping through the investor slide deck, I noticed that there was really only one sentence that referenced batteries, and that said, quote, "We believe our current projects, including large castings, structural battery pack, 4680 cells, and many others, should help us to continue to minimize our product cost." This was a really positive statement to me because it backs up what I've been saying in the last two earnings calls. 2 earnings calls ago, I said, all right, looks like they still have some issues. It was clear that they were still having issues with battery cell production, and then they didn't make any mention of battery cells in the last quarterly earnings call. In that earnings call, they mentioned that they were working on getting the battery pack verified. I said, all right, so that's the next hurdle. After we get that out of the way, we should see vehicles with 4680 battery cells in them. I think I said in the first quarter of 2022. This indicated to me that that's actually the case, that it's all green lights and all they have to do is continue to scale to increase volume and bring down production costs. In other words, it got me really bowled up for what Elon and Drew were about to say. So let's move on to those comments. Elon kicked off with an opening statement that almost immediately referenced 4680 battery cells. Quote, "So in Texas, we're building the Model Ys with the structural battery pack and the 4680 cells, and we'll start delivering after final certification of the vehicle, which should be fairly soon." End quote. I think anyone who's followed my videos knows the significance of this statement. Tesla is now a fully mature and fully integrated manufacturer on its most critical component, which is battery cells. This has been quite a journey over the past 17 months, and we've really only seen the tail end of it. This was a process that started probably a decade ago from what I can tell from their patents, and it was probably in Elon's brain even before that. So I think we can all breathe a collective sigh of relief. I had confidence that Tesla would achieve this throughout the process, but I'm also kind of a high anxiety person, and I don't like to mark something off as done and complete, achieved, until it's actually done, complete, or achieved. And until then, it's playing in the back of my mind. So this was certainly a relief to me. I have confidence in the company, but something's not done until it's done. And the sooner that it is done, the sooner that we can start seeing these battery cells in vehicles and start seeing an impact on Tesla's bottom line. So just to recap, the Model Ys coming out of Austin right now contain the 4680 battery cell and structural battery pack. After they've passed final certification here in the next few months, we will be seeing those vehicles on the road. Elon's next comment was in relation to the product roadmap. Quote, "If we'd actually introduced an additional product, that would then require a bunch of attention and resources that increase the complexity of the additional product, resulting in fewer vehicles actually being delivered. We will not be introducing new vehicle models this year. It would not make any sense because we'll still be parts constrained." So from my perspective, it sounds like the key bottleneck for them is a parts constraint rather than a constraint of engineering resources. And I think it's critical to understand that because it sets up what Elon says next. Quote, "We will, however, do a lot of engineering and tooling and whatnot to create the Cybertruck, Semi, Roadster, Optimus, and be ready to bring those to production hopefully next year." He continues, "I think actually the most important product development we're doing this year is actually the Optimus humanoid robot. This, I think, has the potential to be more significant than the vehicle business over time. End quote. This comment rankled a lot of people, and I can understand why. I've been a Tesla investor for 5 years now, and the company's worked so hard to get the vehicle business moving. And just when it gets moving, it starts becoming a cash cow that Tesla can just milk. It seems like Elon shifted focus. And I'll give my perspective on that. As I just said, it sounds like they're more parts constrained than they are engineering resources constrained. Now, that's not to say that they don't have any constraints with engineering resources. As Elon said over the years, they need as many good engineers as they can get. But this year, more so, it doesn't matter how many engineers they don't have the materials that they need to actually produce the vehicles. So you have all these engineers that have been working on advanced projects for the past several years. Just the 4680 battery cell line alone would have been a massive undertaking. And they've worked out most of the kinks from that production process. Then on top of that, they have the structural battery pack. There would have been a big team working on that. There would have been a team working on the gigacastings. So you have all their top engineers that have been working on these advanced products, and now they need something else to work on. And my view is your best engineering talent, you want to put them on the most interesting, difficult projects to work on. So that's what they're doing now, is they're taking advantage of all this engineering resources to plant the seeds for future products. And one of the big ones will be the humanoid robot. Of course, on top of that, there's, we need to get ready for the Cybertruck and put all the manufacturing in place for that. But the humanoid robot is, if we want to see Tesla continue on an exponential path into the 2030s, those seeds have to be planted now. And furthermore, I think there's another aspect to this that possibly people don't appreciate. And this is just my own thoughts on this. I don't know if it's actually reality. I actually need to have a chat with James Douma potentially to get his thoughts on it, which is, it looks like Tesla's looking to build a fleet of robots in the same way that they built a fleet of cars. My initial thoughts on the robot was they'd need to build the AI, and then they would embody the AI in the robot once they get it to a certain level. But after I thought about that, that wouldn't make sense. If they're going to do the robot the same way that they did the Robotaxi that they're still working on, you need to put the artificial intelligence into some embodiment so it can interact with the world and collect data. I don't know exactly how that's going to work. With full self-driving, for instance, there's any input is error. And then they lock into that, and that's how they train the AI system. I don't know how they're going to do that with a robot. That's something I probably need to discuss with James Douma. So yeah, there's a lot of people who thought that we wouldn't actually see a robot for several years to come because the AI has so much catching up to do. But isn't it better to build the robot and then put the AI in it and then progress from there? That's my view at least. And I'm interested to hear your comments below, so have at it. Now on to Drew, who gave us a great update on 4680 cell production and progress on that production. Quote, "So throughout 2021, we focused on growing cell supply alongside our in-house 4680 effort to provide us with flexibility and insurance as we attempt to grow as fast as possible. As we sit today, sales from suppliers actually sort of exceeds our other factory limiting constraints. Or to say differently, 4680 cells are not a constraint to our 2022 volume plans based on the information we have." So there you have it. Battery cells are not the limiting factor for 2022. And that's great news. But I think when they refer to volume plans, they're actually referring to vehicle production volumes. The implication there is any battery cells that are excess to their needs for vehicle production will go into energy storage products, which means we could see a massive increase in the amount of energy storage products produced this year. And we'll discuss that more a little bit later in the video. Drew goes on to say, quote, "But we're making meaningful progress of the ramp curve in Cato. We're building 4680 structural battery packs every day, which are being assembled into vehicles in Texas. I was driving one yesterday and the day before, and we believe our first 4680 vehicles will be delivered this quarter. Our focus on the cell, the pack, and the vehicles here is driving yield quality and cost to ensure we're ready for larger volumes this year as we ramp, and next year." Now, what Drew is saying here is basically repeating what Elon just said. He's just providing a bit more detail. They're going to have that line at Cato Road absolutely singing by the time that they get the cell production up and running at Austin. And by the time they hit the gas on the Austin plant, they're going to be quite knowledgeable, and they're going to be in a great position to increase the production rate rapidly and with the most efficiency. It was also a nice touch, Drew saying that he took one of those Model Ys for a spin, or a couple of those Model Ys for a spin. It's a great mental image, and it makes what they're doing more real. It makes it more tangible in some way, but it was nice to hear. Moving on. Quote, "The 4680 and pack tool installations here at Giga Austin are progressing well, with some areas producing first parts, and the internet has noticed that." Yes, we have. We have noticed all the work that's been going on down there, and we appreciate the hard work. That's mainly thanks to Joe Tegmeyer and Jeff Roberts. They've been doing a lot of sleuthing down there, besides their drone footage, gathering information from the employees and finding out, as parts and pieces come in, what those parts and pieces are and what they do. So much thanks to them. It takes a whole community to keep on top of what Tesla's doing. Drew continues, "Yeah, I was touring the factory, the cell factory here. I'm super pumped. It's like a really exciting accomplishment for us to bring everything into one Austin factory here in Texas." End quote. Well, we're excited too. And as I said a moment ago, we appreciate all the hard work the team at Tesla is doing. I'm glad there's so much transparency and we can watch all of it unfold. And I think it's worth adding here that I don't think, at least I haven't seen it mentioned elsewhere, the significance of what Drew's saying here, what a big shift this is. Because for the Model Y, Tesla was getting their 18650 battery cells from Japan. It would take, 10 to 15 days for those battery cells to get to Tesla. And then with the Model 3 and the Model Y, they started getting their 2170 battery cells from Giga Nevada, Panasonic again. That probably took, let's say, 10 to 15 hours to get those battery cells. Now they have the battery cell factory in the same building. The lead time is 10 to 15 minutes to get those battery cells? It's a huge quality of life improvement. And besides all the stats that were given at Battery Day, there's also the logistics costs that are being saved from moving those battery cells around. I mean, just the number of semis that must have been running between Giga Nevada and Fremont, it must have just been ridiculous. Now they can just, pop them on a conveyor belt. I'm not sure how they're moved around within the factory, but it's going to save them a lot of time, great quality of life improvement. It's like, say, if your favorite store had a distribution center in your garage rather than 2 states over. It makes everything so much easier. It's one less ball in the air for Tesla to track. And anything that they can do to eliminate things from their headspace and simplify their process gives the company more momentum and frees up more resources so they can do more. It's just a snowballing effect when you simplify things. So that's my rant on that. Let's move on to more comments by Elon. Quote, "We still expect to be part or primarily chip limited this year. So that's the thing. That's actually the driver." We've actually covered this already in the past 2 earnings calls. Chips it was all about the chips in 2021, and it's going to be all about the chips again in 2022. And this just reinforces how important or how much of a limiting factor these parts shortage issues are. And At this point, Elon stopped and he thanked suppliers, which I think it's really important. Quote, "I'd like to just second the thank you to suppliers. A lot of suppliers worked late nights, weekends, and vacations around the world, and we're very grateful for that." End quote. As I said a moment ago, I think these thank yous are really important. If you're working a 9-to-5 job, or, well, in this case, it sounds like, all 3 shifts grinding away on these things, a little appreciation goes a long way, especially if it's from somebody that's working as hard as you do. And I think it's a mark of Elon's character. He's a really hard worker, and because of that, being at the coalface all the time, he appreciates what all these people are doing. And these thank yous makes it feel like everybody's pulling the same direction. And it's a really important quality in a leader to show that appreciation, to show that humility. And he does it. Besides his Twitter antics and his cockiness, he's a good guy. Moving along. Elon's next comment was on the $25,000 electric vehicle. Quote, "We're not currently working on a $25,000 car. At some point, we will, but we have enough on our plate right now. Too much on our plate, frankly. It's sort of a wrong question, really." End quote. And I think they're actually working on a $25,000 car, but I think it's something it's on the back burner. It's not something that they're actively working on. I'm sure they have designers with ideas, but there's one thing developing a design and a look, etc., and then there's actually doing all the engineering to get that vehicle to move down the road safely and to have a nice refined product. And what Elon said here is in line with my expectations. I've been saying for a while that I think it's going to be 2023 or 2024 before we see a $25,000 vehicle. In my view, that's how long it's going to be before Tesla gets out from under their current lineup of products that they need to get out the door. They have to work through a backlog of promises before they can start even thinking about a $25,000 vehicle. In fact, if you take into account that Tesla generally starts with higher trim vehicles when they start a vehicle launch, and then they work down from there, it might be 2024, 2025 before we actually see a $25,000 vehicle or something even near $25,000. Because when this vehicle first releases, I expect the first models that are released to cost about, $35,000 to $40,000 before they work down the range. And then it depends on demand. There may be enough demand at, say, a $28,000 price point that they never get down to $25,000. And that's the same way that, they started with a $35,000 Model 3, but how many $35,000 Model 3s did we see? And that's not Tesla's fault. That's the nature of the beast. That's supply and demand. Now, in this part of the earnings call, Elon said, all right, the correct question you should be asking is about the Robotaxi. Why is the Robotaxi so important? It's because if Tesla can produce, say, 2 million vehicles a year, and a Robotaxi is worth, about 5 vehicles in terms of the amount of people moving it can do. Producing 2 million vehicles is the equivalent of producing 10 million vehicles. And that's Tesla's mission, to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. And one of the reasons people are concerned about Tesla having a $25,000 vehicle is because they don't think Tesla will have enough demand if they only have the Model 3, the Model Y, and the Cybertruck, and of course the Model S and the X. But the bulk of that demand will of course be the 3 and the Y. And the thinking is that, we need a smaller vehicle to move into the larger vehicle segments. And I don't think that's the case. My view is that if Tesla gets the Robotaxi network working fine, they can pretty much take every Model 3 that they produce and they can turn those into Robotaxis. And even at maximum production and maximum scaling, it'll take at least 5 years to build out a basic global taxi fleet. We're talking Tesla can probably produce 2 to 3 million Model 3s a year, just Model 3s, if they're devoting all those vehicles to Robotaxi. because those vehicles will get used because they're going to be a fraction of the cost of an Uber. Now, let's say, worst case scenario, Tesla isn't able to develop a Robotaxi by 2025. Well, the current cost of a Tesla vehicle is around, I think the average selling price is a little over $50,000. They can still significantly cut the prices of their vehicle down to the $35,000 to $40,000 range where there's a lot more demand. So there's levers that Tesla can pull to ensure that even with a Model 3 and a Model Y, they can produce millions of vehicles a year and still have plenty of demand. That all needs to be taken into consideration before we start pushing for a Model 2. I'd still like to see a Model 2 because not everybody wants to use a taxi to go everywhere all the time. It will become more common if robotaxis are available, but there's a lot of us who are still going to want our own vehicle, and it'll be nice to have a cheaper vehicle available. When that time comes, given all of Tesla's experience and the small amount of battery supply it will require for a Model 2, they should be able to rapidly develop and launch a Model 2. So it's not something I'm concerned about. I expect when they do announce the Model 2 that it's not going to take them that long to get it into production from the time the unveiling. I think it's been they've announced a vehicle 1 year or several years before we actually get to drive it. But I would like to see that compressed with the Model 2 where they announce it, say, in March of 2023, and then we actually see the vehicle going into production late that year with volume production into 2024. I'm not saying that's the timeline I actually expect, but it would be good to see an announcement and then production rather than an announcement and then wait a couple of years before you see the vehicle. They've fallen into that trap a few times. So yeah, there's plenty of products they have on their roadmap. Let's chew through those and then start thinking about a Model 2 because it's not critical for the time being. At this point, one of the analysts asks about Tesla HVAC, and Drew Baglino responds, quote, "Let me put it this way. It's definitely aligned with our mission to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy," end quote. And then Elon elaborates, quote, "Yeah, I think it really becomes quite a compelling solution to the consumer where you integrate the electric vehicle's charging, solar, energy storage, hot water, HVAC, in a very tight, compact package that also looks good. It just doesn't exist," end quote. Tesla HVAC is a product that I'm starting to become more and more passionate about. To me, I see a lot of opportunities for improvement, and Brandon Kruger on the 5 Years Ahead YouTube channel did a video explaining how the octavalve works in the Model 3. And I just think about how that could be applied to a home. And it just seems like there's a lot of opportunities there for energy saving. So I'll do some more thinking and research on that. And when I pull together my thoughts, I'll do a video on it. The difficult part of a Tesla HVAC system would actually be the distribution of that HVAC system and the software. In terms of the hardware itself, it's super basic, and they've already done the hard work by developing it for a vehicle where it has to be compact and mold to the vehicle. Whereas in a home, you have an empty space, and there's not as many space limitations. So it seems to be a matter of wiring, aluminum, steel, basic materials, pulling those together into a product. And I think they could just ramp that like crazy as soon as they get it down. But as I said, I'll share more thoughts when I've thought more about it. So moving on, there was a question from an analyst about what obstacles the Cybertruck might encounter with its production ramp. And Elon responded, quote, "Batteries will probably not be the limiting factor in Cybertruck production. There's a lot of new technology in the Cybertruck that will take some time to work through," end quote. Last year, there was a view that developed in the Tesla community that because the 4680 cell production ramp was delayed or appeared to be delayed, that was causing delays in vehicle ramps and the release of new vehicles. And at that time, I cautioned that it may not necessarily be the case. There's a lot of different shortages going on at the time, and it couldn't necessarily be laid at the feet of the 4680. And that's basically what this is saying. My guess is that the latter half of last year, they fully expected to ramp Berlin and Austin, but they ran out of chips, A, and B, they ran into regulatory issues at Berlin. So they were forced to shift their focus just to ramping the existing lines that they have. And this is probably a good time to point out that we've seen a big shift in Tesla's cell strategy with the 4680 as to where they're rolling it out first. Originally, they planned to do the 4680 cell and pack production in Berlin, but now that's Austin. And in the middle of last year, this is something I said could happen because the construction was going so slowly at Berlin. And on top of that, at Giga Austin, we were hearing rumors from Joe Tegmeyer, I believe, possibly Jeff Roberts, that there was going to be a cell production area built into the current building. And that panned out, and it looks like that's the case. So they hit the gas on Austin and hit the brakes on Berlin and just shifted all those resources over. Elon continued on by saying, aspirationally, we'd like the Cybertruck to be at least on the order of 250,000 vehicles a year, end quote. I was actually going to make a YouTube video on this because I guessed that Tesla would be shooting for about 250,000 vehicles a year for their first Cybertruck production line. So where did I get that number from? Elon has said that the GigaPress is capable of 500,000 pressings per year. So my view is if they had one GigaPress maxing out at 500,000 castings, that they could do about 250,000 rear castings and 250,000 front castings. Now that may have just been dumb luck. It may be the case that they have a separate GigaPress machine for the front and a separate one for the rear. I don't think they're anywhere near 500,000 pressings per year, but we also don't know when Elon said 250,000 vehicles a year, what his time frame was for that. So there's a few variables that we don't know. Either way, 250,000 fits well with a current-ish production rate for 2 gigacasting machines or a future gigacasting machine producing 500,000 parts split between doing the front and rear castings with one machine. Regardless, what this means is it looks like we'll see Cybertruck production increase in increments of about 250,000 vehicles a year. 250,000 vehicles a year is pretty significant, especially for a vehicle with a battery pack that large. And I don't know how long it's going to be before they increase that to, say, 500,000 vehicles a year, because I see the demand for Cybertruck as at least 500,000 vehicles a year. 750,000 vehicles a year? Possibly. 1 million vehicles a year seems like a stretch, but well, it depends if the Cybertruck is released to the global market. If that's the case, we might see people all over the world getting the Cybertruck because it's just such a practical vehicle. I've never wanted a truck before the Cybertruck was available because they always seemed too fragile, even though they were meant to be heavy duty. Just the beds get scratched up and they have poor fuel efficiency. The Cybertruck is ultra durable, ultra long lasting. It's something that even if it's super expensive, you spend, even if you spend $100,000 on it, it's going to last forever. So you can amortize that over 30 or 40 years. I plan on getting my Cybertruck, and it's probably going to be the last vehicle I ever buy. One post-recording addition here. I'd really love to have a Tesla Roadster. But we'll see where the Tesla stock goes over the years and how much they end up costing and how much they end up producing. It'd be cool to get a Roadster at some point, but that's, I really can't justify it the same way that I can a Cybertruck. The next question that Tesla was asked at the earnings call was about LFP batteries for energy storage. Now, those who watched my videos know that I'm really bullish on LFP, and Elon is as well. And once again, Elon reinforces that view. Quote, "Yeah, to be clear, we do think that all energy storage, Powerwall, and Megapack will transition to an iron-based system, basically a non-nickel system." End quote. This is really interesting because in the past, Tesla said that the Powerwall would get nickel manganese type chemistry. And I struggled to justify that. And the only reason I thought that it would make sense to use nickel manganese for a Powerwall was if walls couldn't support the weight of those super heavy LFP batteries. But that, it looks like that's not a limiting factor. Basically, it just looks like they've changed their mind on it. And they've gone a direction that makes more sense to me, at least, because lithium iron phosphate batteries make a lot more sense for every type of energy storage, particularly for home energy storage, because they're much safer than nickel-based cells. They're cheaper and they have longer cycle life. So I'm glad that they're heading the LFP direction with home energy storage. Next, Elon says, quote, manganese is also could be part of the future, but primarily iron. Manganese is like a wild card. There's lots of manganese, end quote. A lot of people assume that what Elon was saying here was that they're going to start using manganese in LFP battery cells. Now, you can dope lithium iron phosphate batteries with manganese, and it does increase energy density. And I do expect Tesla will probably do that at some point. It's something I need to do a bit more research on. But my assumption was what he was referring to here was a primarily manganese-based cathode. And in order to confirm that, I sent Elon a tweet, and he actually responded. He responded with 2 tweets, in fact. The first one said, quote, manganese is an alternative to iron and phosphorus for scaling cathode production to several terawatt hours per year, end quote. And, quote, manganese also requires less lithium as it operates at a higher voltage, end quote. In other words, he wasn't referring to LFP plus manganese, as I had assumed, but rather a higher voltage manganese chemistry. Now, I also included an image or a graph in that tweet because I wanted to focus his attention on something specific and hopefully get a more specific answer from him. And I think the fact that he said higher voltage, it may have been a clue that he's referring to lithium nickel manganese oxide. Because as you can see on this graph, there's lithium manganese oxide, which is LMO, and lithium nickel manganese oxide, which is LNMO. The lithium manganese oxide, it typically doesn't have very good cycle life, and it has roughly the same voltage as a standard nickel-based chemistry. Whereas the lithium nickel manganese oxide has a much longer cycle life and also has a much higher voltage. So I'm betting he was referring to lithium nickel manganese oxide. For those who've been watching my channel for a long time, since the beginning, you'll remember in my first few videos that I did bring up lithium nickel manganese oxide as a potential candidate for battery day because it just seemed like such a promising battery chemistry. However, after I talked to some researchers, I found that, well, it still has a while to go before it's ready for commercial viability. Because of its high voltage, it tends to break down the electrolyte. So you need a special electrolyte to make it work. And they do have electrolytes available that work pretty well with lithium nickel manganese oxide. However, they tend to be very expensive. I'm hoping what this means is Tesla's working in the background on an electrolyte for a lithium nickel manganese oxide chemistry. If that's the case, in my view, lithium nickel manganese oxide, I'm as bullish or more bullish on that than I am for LFP because it has such high energy density. Most of the materials in it are widely available. It does use nickel, but it uses a smaller amount of nickel. So it would allow Tesla to switch all their nickel-based battery cells to something that used quite a bit less nickel, and they would still get a similar energy density out of it, plus much longer cycle life. So it's a great chemistry in my view. I think it's also worth noting that Elon was looking pretty deep into the future and just kind of doing some speculation here, which I haven't seen him do with batteries before, and just to offer it up like that. So that was it was a really interesting comment from that perspective. One thing I did notice was an absence of any talk about sodium ion. Now, I'm working on a video about sodium ion, and I keep running into roadblocks with it because despite all the great marketing around it, there are some fishhooks. I'd really like to see sodium ion work out, but I don't see it really, if it does work out, I don't see it at large scale until the mid-2020s. CATL did say that they're going to put a basic supply chain in by, I think it was 2023. Now, a basic supply chain, that doesn't sound like 30 to 45 gigawatt hours worth of production to me, because that would be a massive portion of CATL's current production, which, they've been working on that for about a decade now. So in order for sodium ion to catch up, it's going to take a while, even if CATL hits the gas real hard on it. And it's also worth noting that the battery cells that they're currently producing, these sodium-ion batteries, a lot of the production is for test cells to go out to manufacturers. So it may be the case that Tesla's testing those battery cells right now, and possibly in the future they'll be willing to say more about it after they've had a chance to verify CATL's claims and make sure those battery cells work for their energy storage products. Next up, there was a question about the growth of the energy storage business. Zachary Kirkhorn responded, quote, "The exact amount of growth is hard to know, but ultimately, to Elon's point about the growth of this business, we need to be growing it faster than the vehicle business," end quote. And then Elon followed up by saying, quote, "It will naturally grow faster than the vehicle business. It will grow like kelp on steroids, and our primary mission is to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. That's always been our primary mission, and we're trying to stay true to that," end quote. This is something I'm going to keep my eye on. If Tesla has plenty of battery cells this year, all the overflow, as I said earlier, will go into the energy storage business. And Powerwalls and power packs are infinitely more easy to scale than a vehicle. There's no HVAC system, there's no seats, there's no people aren't so concerned about panel gaps with the Powerwall, though I doubt that would be an issue with something that's that small. And as we saw in the last earnings call, Tesla's been laying the groundwork for ridiculous growth in the energy storage business. Roughly 8x is what they have planned. If everything goes well this year, they could end up growing the energy storage business by 2 to 3 times, depending on how many battery cells they have overflowing that aren't needed for vehicle production. Let's move on to more talk about the $25,000 Tesla. An analyst asked, quote, "If there's no $25,000 vehicle being worked on, is it really realistic to think that you can sell more than 3 million vehicles with 2 very high-volume cars and Cybertruck in 2024?" End quote. To that, Elon responded, quote, "Yeah, it's apparent from the questions that the gravity of full self-driving is not fully appreciated. If an asset has 5 times more the utilization rate, it's like dividing the cost of the asset by 5. So if you have a $50,000 car, it's like having a $10,000 car all of a sudden, but maybe better than that still, because you won't have to drive," end quote. Now, I feel like I covered this off pretty well earlier, but there may be a few more nuggets that I can add in here and maybe re-summarize and re-encapsulate this, because if Tesla develops Robotaxi successfully, and they're able to take 2 million vehicles and make those as useful as 10 million vehicles, the cash flow opportunity there is absolutely ridiculous. Is the point of Tesla to make a lot of cars, or is it to transition the world to sustainable energy and make revenue? Because if it's the latter, to make revenue and transition the world to sustainable energy, they'll take every vehicle that they have, or every vehicle that's appropriate for a robotaxi, and they'll turn those vehicles into robotaxis, and they'll just rake in the money. They'll just skim that cream. So that's one reason why people shouldn't be so focused on the number of vehicles produced. But there will be demand for as many vehicles as Tesla can possibly produce, because they can still drive the price of their current vehicle range down lower. And even if they tried to launch more vehicles now, they wouldn't have the parts to do it. So I'm not stressing about the $25,000 vehicle. Next, Drew made comments about the 4680 form factor. The analyst Pierre Ferragu asked if Tesla expected all outside suppliers to use the 4680 form factor. Now, I already covered this in my Tesla LFP video, but I'll do a summary again here. If you'd like to know more about this, it's worth watching the Tesla LFP video. So Drew said, quote, "Yeah, on the 4680 as a form factor, yes, we've engaged with a number of our, partners and suppliers on the form factor, and they're all working on it. And, they look at the way we look at it as a way to drive fundamental cost efficiencies in production, and also, ultimately, the design of the cell itself to drive down the cost of the cell. To the question about should everything be 4680, it doesn't have to be. And in the end, it's about cost competitiveness, scalability of manufacturing. And when you compare like an iron cell with a nickel cell, for example, there are just like some physics-based differences in what happens in certain corner cases that would drive different form factors. And we just have to be cognizant of that and design to that. So it isn't like the ultimate form factor for all things. There's other form factors that could be better for an iron-based cell, for example. And then Elon Musk jumped in and said, quote, "Yeah, we don't use 4680 at all for iron-based cells," end quote. Now, all Drew is saying here is that different form factors have different use cases. There's no technical reason why Tesla can't make a 4680 LFP cell or a prismatic LFP cell or both. A smaller cylindrical form factor would just have better thermal characteristics and lower energy density. A larger prismatic format would have better energy density, but it would have worse thermal characteristics. So it may be a case of Tesla will use different form factor types for different use cases. And it's worth bearing in mind that when they were responding to Pierre Ferragu's question, they were referring to outside cell supply. So what Drew said may or may not apply to Tesla's in-house cell production. So what's my view on this? My view is that Tesla will develop an in-house 4680 LFP battery cell, and that's because they've already devoted the engineering time, resources, and money into developing that form factor. Because that's the one they're using for nickel, all they have to do is just adjust the mixture on their cathode and anode for an LFP battery cell, and they should just be able to switch those lines over or create new lines using existing technology to create LFP 4680 battery cells. And on that same line of thinking, I think CATL and BYD, they're going to continue to use the prismatic LFP battery cells because that's what they've developed all their engineering resources into. And what Tesla can do is they can, say, for instance, use CATL's battery cells for energy storage for LFP, and then they could use their 4680s for their structural battery pack. So ultimately, I think it's kind of an academic point. Tesla will do the right thing. Tesla will make the right choice. And on the customer end, we won't see much of a difference because they're going to make the right choice. In terms of the bottom line, the same is true. I don't think it will have much of an effect whether Tesla chooses the 4680 or prismatic on their bottom line. But again, they will choose the form factor that works best. I try to avoid favorite technologies. I am fond of LFP and lithium nickel manganese oxide, but that's because of what it allows in terms of manufacturing cost and scaling. In terms of a form factor, as I said in the Tesla LFP video, does it matter whether your battery looks like a Spam can or a Campbell's soup can? It doesn't really matter. So I think with that, this is the end of the video. If you enjoyed me going off the beaten path a little bit and covering things that aren't battery related and enjoyed the rants, let me know in the comments below because I'm happy to give my thoughts on other things, but batteries are my specialty and I'm aware that people generally come to the channel to hear battery related information. So yeah, I would appreciate feedback below. I can expand my discussion space a little bit beyond batteries if it adds value to the community. And with that, thanks for watching. Thanks again to all my YouTube supporters and Patreon subscribers. As soon as I get a little bit more settled in, I'll make a video explaining my current situation. And I'm also thinking about making a video to summarize all the battery news from like the past 4 or 5 months. I've started logging all the battery news and kind of lumping it together and trying to see patterns, what's happened in the past few months. There might be a few things in there that people aren't aware of or haven't heard of. If you're interested in hearing that, let me know. I was thinking about starting to do that potentially doing that about once a month, because there's a lot of information that I dump on you in my videos. And when we go through the news, if we go through the news together, it allows me to take those pieces of information and weave them together and just apply the knowledge that I've been trying to put out in my channel. And I think it'll help crystallize connections and concepts in people's minds. So yeah, let me know. And thanks for tuning in.